What if a single blood-red key could unravel a murder, expose a family secret, and bring down one of London's most powerful men? In this video, we step into the fog-draped streets with Sherlock Holmes in the riddle of the Crimson Key. I'm your digital host, Mark Robin, and this is Dark Truth, Chapter 1. A midnight visitor. It was a cold and windswept evening in the autumn of 1895 when I found myself once again seated before the fire at 221B Baker Street, opposite my friend Sherlock Holmes. The gaslight flickered softly against the bookshelves, casting elongated shadows upon the walls. Holmes, for his part, was in one of his familiar moods of silent contemplation, the tendrils of his pipe smoke curling toward the ceiling like phantoms of half-formed thoughts. I had long since ceased to question his peculiar ways, though on occasion his extended silences left me restless to pass the time. I leafed through the Evening Standard, noting a report on a minor diplomatic incident in Constantinople when an unexpected sound shattered the tranquility of our lodgings, a rapid, insistent knocking at the door. Holmes raised an eyebrow, his keen eyes flickering with interest. A visitor at this hour? Watson? How very promising. He exhaled a final puff of smoke and rose to his feet with the ease of a man expecting amusement rather than disruption. Mrs. Hudson, ever the vigilant landlady, had barely unlatched the door when a tall, gaunt figure swept into the room. The man's great coat was drenched with rain. His face pale and drawn beneath the dim light, he clutched a small bundle in his trembling hands, wrapped in what appeared to be silk. "Mr. Holmes," he gasped, as though the very act of speaking drained what little strength remained in him. "I have come at great peril. I fear I have little time." Holmes gestured swiftly to the chair nearest the fire. "Pray, take a seat. You're most welcome in our humble abode. Though I perceive you are hardly in a state to indulge in pleasantries." The man collapsed into the chair, running a hand through his damp hair. He hesitated for a moment, then unwrapped the bundle. A small, ornate key, glistening with an almost unnatural crimson hue, lay in his palm. "This," he said, "Healy is the cause of my ruin." I leaned forward instinctively. Holmes, however, merely steepled his fingers, his sharp gaze fixed upon the object. "A most peculiar key," he murmured. "Tell me, sir, what ill fortune has brought it into your possession?" The man swallowed hard before speaking. "My name is Horace Endicott, and 3 nights ago my brother was murdered." The key was found clenched in his hand. A silence settled upon the room, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Holmes' expression remained unreadable, but I, for one, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night's cold. "And you believe," Holmes said at last, "that whoever this key belongs to is the one who took your brother's life?" Endicott nodded gravely. "I do, but the problem, Mr. Holmes, is this." He hesitated before continuing his voice. B, barely above a whisper. "No lock in a household fits this key, nor do I know how my brother came to possess it." Holmes leaned forward ever so slightly, the faintest gleam of intrigue flashing in his gray eyes. Now that he murmured, "Is a riddle worth solving." Chapter 2. The Unseen Thread. Holmes regarded the Crimson Key with the fascination of a naturalist who had stumbled upon an exotic specimen never before documented. The flickering lamplight danced across its surface, revealing intricate engravings too delicate to be purely ornamental. He did not touch it immediately, merely observing it with that hawk-like intensity that often preceded Ed. His moments of revelation. "You say this key was found in your brother's hand, Mr. Endicott," he murmured at last, his voice as smooth as polished steel. "Was there any sign of struggle?" Horace Endicott, still pale from the shock of his ordeal, nodded grimly. Yes, the room was in disarray. Papers were strewn across the desk, the drawers pulled from their hinges. It looked as though he had been searching for something, or someone had searched after he was dead. And yet Holmes mused, tapping his fingers against the arm of his chair. They left behind the key. Strange. If the murderer sought something, one would assume that they found it. That leaves us with two possibilities. Either the key was of no value to them, or its presence was deliberate. The weight of his words seemed to deepen the lines on Endicott's face. Deliberate, he echoed. Planted there to mislead Holmes. Clarified an object meant to direct our gaze away from the true nature of the crime. However, until I have seen the scene for myself, we cannot say for certain, Watson. What do you make of this key? I leaned forward, studying the object in Endicott's trembling hands. It was smaller than I had expected, no longer than a few inches, but the most peculiar aspect was its deep crimson hue. It did not appear to be painted, nor was it a material I recognized. It is finely crafted, I admitted. Perhaps it belongs to an antique lock, something rare. Holmes nodded approvingly. An excellent observation. Watson, a man does not carry such a key unless it opens something of great importance, a simple lockbox, a hidden compartment, a safe, perhaps. But Mr. Endicott has assured us that no such lock exists in his brother's possession. This presents us with an elegant dilemma. There is one more thing, Endicott said. Suddenly, he reached into his coat pocket and produced a crumpled sheet of parchment. Holmes unfolded it carefully, his eyes scanning the brief, hastily scrolled message to H. The key is but a question. The answer lies in the shadow of the lion. Holmes's fingers tight-handed slightly around the paper. Fascinating, I felt a prickle of unease at the cryptic message. Do you recognize the handwriting, Mr. Endicott? No, he admitted, but it was found in my brother's jacket pocket when the police searched his body. The police believe it. It'll be irrelevant, nothing more than a meaningless note, but His voice faltered. I know my brother. If he carried this with him, it meant something. Holmes nodded. Rising abruptly, he crossed the room in long strides and retrieved a well-worn reference book from the shelf. Shadow of the Lion, he murmured, flipping the pages rapidly. It could refer to a statue, an engraving, or even a particular landmark. There are several establishments in London bearing the name the Lion Taverns, banks, even a gentleman's club. Watson, do you recall? The Lion's Archway near Whitehall? Yes, I replied. It marks the entrance to one of the older alleyways, does it not? Indeed, Holmes said, shutting the book with a snap. Mr. Endicott, where was your brother? Last seen alive at his home in bed, Foot Square. Endicott replied. He retired to his study late in the evening, as was his habit. The servants heard nothing unusual until morning, when his valet found him dead, and the cause of death a single stab wound to the heart. Endicott whispered no sign of forced entry. The door was locked from the inside. Holmes smiled a gold razor-sharp expression that I had seen before. It meant that the case had become truly interesting to him. A locked room mystery, Watson, he declared. How splendid, we shall visit Bedford Square at once. Endicott hesitated. You mean tonight there is no time like the present? Holmes replied. A crime scene is like a stage. Mr. Endicott, the performance may be over, but the traces of the play remain footprints in the dust. The scent of a visitor's perfume, the small disturbances that tell a greater story, each passing hour erases those signs. We must act swiftly. Though I was accustomed to Holmes's nocturnal tendencies, I could not suppress a sigh as I reached for my coat. Within minutes we were outside, braving the bitter chill of the London night. Bedford Square was eerily silent when we arrived. The gas lamps cast long, wavering shadows against the stately facades of Georgian tow houses, their brickwork darkened with age. A single constable stood guard outside number 17, nodding curtly at our approach. "I assume you are the gentleman from Scotland Yard?" he asked. Holmes produced a card from his pocket and presented it smoothly. "Not quite my good man, but we are here with the family's permission, if you would be so kind as to allow us entry." The constable hesitated only briefly before stepping aside. We entered the house, our footsteps muffled by the thick carpeting. The air was heavy with the scent of extinguished candles and old wood. "His study is just down the hall," Endicott whispered, leading the way. Holmes did not immediately enter. Instead, he stood just beyond the threshold, surveying the room with an intensity that suggested he saw far more than either of us. "Interesting," he murmured. "Watson, what do you observe?" I stepped forward, scanning the room carefully. The desk was indeed in disarray. As Endicott had described, papers litter the floor. An overturned ink pot had left a dark stain upon the carpet, and a chair had been knocked onto its side. The fireplace was cold, the last embers having long since died. But one thing struck me as peculiar. "The candle," I said slowly, "there's only one, and it has burned down completely. If Mr. Endicott had been awake for hours before his death, would he not have lit another?" Holmes's eyes gleamed with approval precisely, and yet had observed the wax upon the desk. "It has dripped unevenly, as if the candle was moved after it had begun melting. Someone disturbed it, the murderer perhaps, or perhaps our victim himself in his final moments." Holmes knelt by the body's former position, running his fingers lightly over the carpet. He sniffed the air once, then nodded to himself. "Gunpowder," he said softly. "Faint but unmistakable." "Gunpowder," I repeated, startled, "which tells us, dear Watson, that something quite different happened in this room than what we have been led to believe." Endicott, who had remained silent until now, gave a choked gasp. "You mean my brother's? Murder was not what it seemed?" Holmes rose, brushing dust from his knees. He gave Endicott a peculiar smile. "I mean, he said that your brother was never meant to die that night at all." Chapter 3. A message in the ashes, Holmes' words, sent a ripple of unease through the dimly lit study, and still clutching the crimson key in his trembling fingers, stared at him in disbelief. "What do you mean he was never meant to die that night?" He stammered home, straightened his gaze, sweeping over the disorderly study with the precision of a surgeon, inspecting an incision. He spoke with a measured calm that only deepened the mystery. "It means, Mr. Endicott, that the sequence of events in this room does not align with an intended murder. Something went awry. Either your brother was not the intended victim, or the crime unfolded in a way the perpetrator did not anticipate. Observe the placement of the body. Watson, where precisely was he found?" I motioned toward the large mahogany desk. He was discovered slumped over the desk, his head resting on his right arm as if he had fallen asleep. Exactly H's pace toward the desk, his long fingers hovering just above its polished surface. Now, let us consider the nature of the wound. A single stab to the heart, no sign of struggle, no cry for help reported by the servants. Yet the room itself tells a different story. Paper scattered, ink spilled, a chair overturned. Do these suggest the behavior of a man who was quietly assassinated? Endicott's face had grown paler still. "You mean—" He fought back. "No," Holmes corrected. "I mean someone else fought here before he was stabbed. And more intriguingly, someone wished to obscure that fact." I frowned, stepping loser to examine the scene. I had seen many a crime in my years with Holmes, but I had learned to look beyond the obvious. The disarray, though it gave the impression of a struggle, was oddly inconsistent. The papers had fallen unnaturally, as though scattered deliberately, rather than flung in desperation. The chair, though overturned, showed no signs of impact against the desco walls. Holmes's keen eyes darted toward the fireplace. It had not been lit for some time, but a faint trace of ash still lingered upon the hearth. Without hesitation, he reached for the poker and stirred the remnants. A small fragment of burnt parchment emerged from the soot, its edges blackened but not wholly. "Consumed, he murmured, extracting it carefully. "And here we have the first to whisper of the truth." Endicott and I leaned in, squinting at the half-burned scrap of paper. The remaining words were barely legible, but Holmes read them aloud with quiet precision. "Urgent. Must not. The lion's shadow." A heavy silence fell off the room. The phrase mirrored the cryptic message found in Endicott's brother's pocket, so it was not merely a note of curiosity. I murmured, "Your brother intended to meet someone, perhaps on the very night of his death." Holmes exhaled sharply, his fingers tapping against his chin. "Not just that, Watson, he intended to conceal this information. Someone, either the murderer or the victim himself, tried to destroy this note. The question is why Endicott swallowed hard. Do you think he knew H.E. was in danger?" Holmes turned to him, studying his expression. "Tell me, Mr. Endicott, did your brother ever mention being followed or receiving threats?" "No." Endicott admitted he was a quiet man, kept to himself. He worked as a legal consultant for various businesses, mostly handling confidential agreements. But he was not the sort to make enemies. "Confidential agreements, you say?" Holmes's eyes darkened with interest. "And tell me, did any of his clients seem particularly, shall we say, reluctant to disclose their dealings?" Endicott hesitated. "I wouldn't know," but he paused, furrowing his brow. "Now that you mention it, there was one recent matter that troubled him about a fortnight ago. He mentioned handling an unusual case, something about an old estate dispute. He never gave details, but I could tell it unsettled him." Holmes exchanged a glance with me, his lips curving into a thin smile. "And at dispute. Curious, Watson, that matters of inheritance so often lead to matters of murder." I nodded. "Indeed. Greed has filled more men than daggers ever could." Holmes chuckled softly. "Well," said, "now, let us consider what we have learned thus far. 1, the victim possessed a key of peculiar, make the purpose of which remains unknown. 2, he carried a cryptic note referencing the lion's shadow. 3, someone attempted to destroy a message containing the very same phrase. And 4, he was involved in a legal case that left him uncharacteristically troubled." He turned to Endicott. "Where are your brother's case files kept in his study?" Endicott replied, "But the police have already searched through them. They found nothing of interest." Holmes let out a soft hum of amusement. But you see, Mr. Endicott, the police are not trained in the art of looking where they are not supposed to." Without another word, he stroked a W. The bookshelves lining the far wall. He ran his fingers lightly along the spines, pausing at a section filled with law journals and bound contracts, then with the swiftness of a magician revealing a trick, he reached for a volume marked Land Disputes of the English Courts and pulled it from the shelf. A faint click echoed in the still air. To my astonishment, a concealed compartment slid open behind the shelf. Inside lay a single envelope, its seal broken. Holmes plucked it out and unfolded the letter. Within his expression, remained impassive as he scanned the contents. "As I suspected," he murmured. "What is it?" Endicott asked breathlessly. Holmes handed me the paper. I adjusted my spectacles and read aloud to Leonard Endicott. "The matter of the estate cannot not remain undisclosed. The key will open what has long been hidden. Beware those who would seek to keep it buried." A chill ran through me. This cannot be coincidence. The key, the note. This case your brother was working on. There is a connection. Indeed, Holmes agreed, and it seems we are not the only ones who seek it. Endicott exhaled shakily. You think someone killed him over this? I think someone would kill again to ensure the truth remains concealed, Holmes said grimly. He turned to me. Watson, I believe it is time we paid a visit to this estate. I have a feeling the answers we seek lie within its walls. And if we are walking into a trap, I asked Holmes, smiled that sharp, knowing smile of H's, then we shall have to show we are the hunters and not the prey. With that, he slipped the letter into his pocket and strode toward the door, already 3 steps ahead in the game of deduction. Chapter 4, The House with the Vanishing Past. The night air was sharp with the promise of approaching winter. As we stepped into the waiting hansom cab, Holmes wasted no time giving our driver us in instructions to Highgate. My good man, Montague House, if you please. Horace, Endicott stiffened beside me. Montague House, but that's the estate mentioned in your brother's case. Holmes finished for him. Yes, it stands to reason that whatever secrets he uncovered were tied to that place, and since we do not yet know which enemy we are dealing with, it would be best to act before they expect us. Endicott hesitated. Montague, whose he has been abandoned for years. Holmes arched an eyebrow. Precisely. Why it intrigues me. The ride through London was a quiet one. I could tell Endicott was uneasy, and truth be told, I shared his apprehension. There was something altogether unsettling about a case in which the pieces did not yet fit together. The locked room, the undisturbed yet chaotic scene, the burnt note, the crimson key. Holmes, for his part, sat in deep contemplation, his fingers drumming lightly against the side of the carriage. It was not until we reached the outskirts of Highgate that he spoke again. Watson, do you recall a case some years ago involving the old Fenwick estate? I thought for a moment. Yes, an inheritance dispute. The rightful heir had been presumed dead, but the entire affair turned out to be a deception. A hidden clause in the will had nearly cost him his fortune. Precisely. You see, Watson, estate disputes have a particular way of drawing out the worst in men. When land title and wealth are at stake, the deeds seldom remain undisturbed if Mr. Endicott's brother stumbled upon a truth that was not meant to be uncovered. It would explain why he was silenced, and Ott swallowed audibly. But why the key? What could it possibly open? Holmes glanced out at the rolling landscape beyond the window. That Mr. Endicott is what we are about to find out. Montague House loomed before us, and a relic of a bygone era, once a grand estate. It now stood in eerie silence, its darkened windows like empty eyes watching our approach. The iron gates were rusted, their once intricate patterns now choked with ivy. A pleasant welcome, I muttered, tightening my keynote against the chill. Holmes gave a small, knowing smile. The best secrets are often found in the least inviting places, Watson, with an air of casual confidence. He strolled forward and tested the gate. To my surprise, it creaked open without resistance. Unlocked, I asked. Curious, isn't it? Holmes replied, for a house that has been abandoned for years. Endicott hesitated before following us inside. The long, overgrown path leading to the entrance was littered with fallen leaves. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted mournfully. Holmes paused at the door. Mr. Endicott, when was the last time anyone was known to set foot in this house, as far as I know? Not in over a decade, he replied. The family that once owned it had no heirs. It fell into legal limbo. One of the casts my brother had been handling involved tracing any surviving relatives. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. Then, tell me, why does this lock appear freshly oiled? He gestured toward the heavy brass lock on the door. Though tarnished with age, the keyhole gleamed ever so slightly. Someone had been here recently. Without another word, Holmes reached into his pocket and withdrew the crimson and key. It slid into the lock with an almost eerie precision. With a soft click, the door swung open. A rush of stale air greeted us, thick with the scent of damp wooden dust. Our lanterns illuminated a grand entry hall, its one stately furnishings covered in sheets. The silence was profound, as though the house itself had been waiting for us. "Stay close," Holmes murmured, "and tread carefully. We are not the first to walk these halls in recent days." Endicott hesitated at the thresh, Old glancing nervously over his shoulder. "Do you believe someone might still be here?" Holmes gave a thin smile. "I do not believe in ghosts, Mr. Endicott, but I do believe in men who wish to remain unseen." We advanced cautiously through the house, our lanterns casting long shadows against the faded wallpaper. Holmes examined everything: the dust on the floor, the untouched furniture, the half-empty shelves where books had once stood. "Watson," he said suddenly, "notice anything peculiar?" I studied the surroundings aside from the unsettling quiet. Precisely for a house that has been abandoned for over a decade, there is remarkably little dust on certain surfaces. Look at this banister. Someone has touched it recently. And this chair. See how the dust has been disturbed. Someone has been using this house, I murmured. Holmes nodded. "Not merely visiting, living here." A sudden creak echoed from above. We froze. Endicott let out a sheesh breath, his grip tightening on his coat that came from upstairs, I whispered. Holmes's eyes gleamed with excitement. "Excellent. It seems our unseen host has decided to make their presence known without hesitation." He ascended the grand staircase, his steps soundless against the ancient wood. I followed closely, my hand drifting toward the revolver I carried in my coat. At the top of the stairs, we found a long corridor lined with doors. Holmes paused, tilting his head slightly. "Third door on the right," he murmured. Someone was moving within, summoning my courage. I stepped forward and pushed the door open. The room beyond was small and sparsely furnished. A desk stood against the far wall, paper strewn across. Its surface, a single candle burned in the corner, its wax dripping onto the floor. But the room was empty. Holmes frowned. Interesting. They knew we were coming. They fled, but not without leaving something behind. He crossed to the desk and picked up a single sheet of parchment. His eyes darted over the words and a slow smile crept across his lips. "What does it say?" I asked. Holmes turned the paper toward us. "You too late. The past is already buried." A shiver ran down my spine. "Holmes, what does this mean?" He exhaled, setting the note down. "It means, Watson, that someone knew we would come looking, and they want us to believe the truth is lost." Endicott swallowed hard. "And is it?" Holmes's sharp gaze fell upon the candle, upon the flickering light that had been left burning in an otherwise abandoned house. "No, Mr. Endicott," he said softly. "It is not lost. It is waiting to be found." Chapter 5. The silent witness. For a long moment, the only sound in the dimly lit room was the soft flickering of the candle. The note on the desk lay between us like a challenge issued from an unseen adversary. He stood more motionless, his sharp gaze fixed on the parchment as though willing it to yield its secrets. "Too late," I murmured, reading the ominous words aloud. "Someone expected us. Holes. They knew we would come here precisely." "Watson," Holmes replied, his voice laced with a quiet intensity. "But that does not mean they know what we will do next." "Horace." Endicott hovered near the doorway, his nervous energy betraying his unease. "If they were just here, could they still be nearby?" Holmes tapped a thoughtful fingers against his chin. "A possibility we must consider." But more importantly, Watson, tell me, what does this room tell us about its previous occupant? I turned my attention to the surroundings. It was a modest chamber, far different from the grand spaces below. The walls were bare, save for a single dust-covered painting. The bed looked rarely used, and the only signs of activity were the scattered papers on the desk. The candle had nearly burned down its wax, pulling into a hardened puddle near the wick. Someone stayed here, but not comfortably. I observed they lived in secrecy. There's no sign of personal belongings, no clothing, no luggage. It suggests they came here for a singular purpose, not to reside permanently. Holmes gave me an approving nod, an astute observation. Watson, whoever occupied this room, did not consider it home. They were a guest, or more likely a trespasser. And look here. He gestured toward the candle. See how the wax has dripped in an uneven pattern? The candle was moved frequently. Someone did not merely light it and leave it. They carried it perhaps while pacing. Endicott furrowed his brow. And what does that tell us? That they were troubled? Holmes replied. A novice mind reveals itself in small habits, restless movements, shifting objects. This person was waiting for something or someone. The question is, who? I turned back to the desk, my gaze falling upon the scattered papers. Holmes followed my line of sight and picked up one of the documents. His eyes flicked across the lines, absorbing the contents. A legal draft. He murmured, an unsigned transfer of ownership for Montague House. Endicott stiffened. What? But no one owns Montague House. It was abandoned after the last family line ended. Precisely, Holmes murmured, and yet someone attempted to claim it. He set the paper down and examined the other documents. Many were incomplete legal statements, drafts of agreements never finalized, but one paper caught his attention, a small, folded letter tucked beneath the stack. Holmes unfolded it carefully. His face betrayed nothing as he read, but when he finished, he handed it to me. I took the paper and read the words aloud. The key opens the past, but the door is closing. If you wish to stop them, meet me beneath the lion's shadow at midnight. The signature was absent. Endicott let out a sharp breath. The lion's shadow again. But Holmes, what does this mean? Holmes's lips curled into a faint smile. It means, dear Watson, that the answer to this mystery does not lie in the past, but in the present. Someone believed they could prevent whatever is happening, and someone else lured. They did not succeed. Then, whoever wrote this note, I hesitated. Could it have been your brother, Mr. Endicott? Endicott shook his head, his expression troubled. My brother was always careful with his words. If he had written such a note, he would have signed it. Whoever wrote this, he gestured at the paper, knew something dangerous. Holmes stuck the letter into his coat. In that case, gentlemen, I suggest we pay a visit to our mysterious meeting place. If the lion's shadow holds the answer, then that is where we must go. The clock neared midnight when we arrived at the location Holmes had spoken of, the Lion's Archway, an ancient stone passageway near Whitehall, marked by the carved relief of a lion's head. The moonlight cast eerie shadows against the alley's damp cobblestones, making the sculpted beast appear almost alive. Holmes studied the surroundings intently. Now, let us think, the message said to me, yet beneath the lion's shadow at midnight, that suggests a precise location, one that only reveals itself at a certain time. I followed his gaze as he watched the lion's stone face, noting the way the moonlight fell upon the alley. The carved relief cast a long shadow, stretching toward the farthest corner of the passageway. His smile smiled there. That is our mark. We moved toward the end of the alley where the shadow touched the wall. Holmes ran his hands lightly over the bricks, searching for any irregularities. Then, with a sudden movement, he pressed against a loose stone. A soft click echoed in the stillness. The brick shifted inward, revealing a hidden compartment. Endicott. G asked a secret passage. Not quite. Holmes corrected more of a concealed deposit, a space to hide something of value. He reached inside and withdrew a small wooden box, its surface worn with age. It bore no markings, no indication of what lay within. Carefully, Holmes lifted the lid. Inside, nestled upon a bed of black velvet, was a single envelope. Holmes unfolded the letter and scanned its contents. His face remained unreadable, but his fingers tightened slightly around the paper. "Holmes," I prompted. Slowly, he handed me the letter. I read aloud. "The truth was never meant to be found. The rightful heir remains, but the secret must die with him. The key is only the beginning." There was no signature. Endicott bailed the rightful heir, but the Monig family died out years ago. Holmes tapped the letter thoughtfully. "That Mr. Endicott is precisely what someone wanted the world to believe." A heavy silence settled over us. I felt the weight of the word S pressing down, like the shadow of the lion itself. Holmes turned to me, his eyes gleaming with certainty. "Watson, this case is not just about a murder. It is about a buried lineage, a fortune unclaimed, and a deception spanning years. The man who died was only the latest victim of a secret far older than we imagined. And what do we do now?" I asked. Holmes closed the box with a quiet snap. "Now, my dear Watson, we find the one person who still holds the truth." Chapter 6. The phantom heir. A bitter wind swept through the deserted alley as we stood in the shadow of the lion's CV'd face. The weight of the discovery hung heavy in the air holes, ever composed. Turned the letter over in his fingers before slipping it into his coat. "This note changes everything," he murmured. "We are no longer dealing with a simple murder, but with a deception carefully orchestrated over time. The existence of a rightful heir suggests that Monig House was never abandoned by fate, but by design." Horace Endicott's face was pale in the moonlight, but if the Montague family line ended years ago, as we have always believed, then who is this rightful heir? Holmes's gray eyes glinted with a calculating sharpness. "That, my dear Mr. Endicott, is what we must determine if someone was meant to inherit Montague House. Then their absence is no accident either. They are unaware of their claim, or someone has gone to great lengths to ensure they never claim it." I exhaled slowly. "You suspect foul play? Then, of course." Holmes replied, "The murder of Leonard Endicott was not a simple crime. It was an execution, and behind every execution, Watson, there is a judge, a jury, and an executioner. We must now determine who fills each of those roles in this deadly drama." Holmes turned sharply on his heel. "Come, we must return to Baker Street. I need my records, and I need them quickly. Time is not on our side." The investigation deepens. Back at 221B Baker Street, the familiar comforts of our sitting room did little to ease the tension. Holmes moved swiftly, pulling out ledgers, legal directories, and newspapers from years past. The air filled with the rustling of pages as he scanned each document with the precision of a hawk spotting its prey. Montague House belonged to the family for generations, he muttered, tracing his finger along a faded genealogy chart. The last recorded owner, Sir Reginald Montague, died in 1873, leaving behind no known heirs. His estate was seized by the CR and left to decay. But he trailed off, his sharp eyes narrowing. "But what I leaned in there was a dispute," Holmes murmured. "A cousin, distant but legitimate, laid claim to the property. His name was Henry Montague, yet there are no further records of him. No death certificate, no marriage records, nothing." Endicott frowned. "He vanished, erased," Holmes corrected. "Someone. ensured that Henry Montague never officially existed. Beyond that claim, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. If he was the rightful heir, then he had to be removed. Holmes finished, and I strongly suspect that his removal was not peaceful. Someone ensured that Montague House would remain abandoned and unclaimed, and if Leonard Endicott stumbled upon this fact, it explains why he was silenced, Endicott's hands clenched into fists. But who would do such a thing? Holmes exhaled the answer, "I fear lies not in the past, but in the present. If someone has been protecting the secret for all these years, they must still be watching, still be ensuring it does not come to light, which means we are in danger." "Gentlemen," Endicott's face drained of color, "you think we're being followed?" Holmes tilted his head slightly. Listening, then, with the swiftness of a striking viper, he crossed the room, threw open the door to the hallway, and stepped outside. The corridor was empty. I frowned. "Holmes," he lifted a hand for silence, then took a step toward the window. With an almost imperceptible movement, he peered through the curtains. A slow smile formed on his lips. "There it is," Endicott, and I rushed to his side, following his gaze. I saw what he meant. Half hidden in the fog-shrouded street below stood a man wrapped in a long overcoat and hat, his posture stiff with forced nonchalance. He had chosen a spot across from Baker Street, far enough to seem coincidental, yet close enough to keep a watchful eye on our door. "We have a spectator," Holmes said, his voice barely above a whisper, a most devoted one at that. "Do you recognize him?" I asked. Holmes's expression darkened number, but he recognizes us. Ott's breath came in short, panicked bursts. "Holmes, what do we do?" Holmes turned to me. "Watson, your revolver, keep it close." I nodded, reaching inside my coat to ensure the weapon was within easy reach now. Holmes continued. "We do nothing. We let him watch, let him believe we are oblivious. Then at the right moment we shall turn the hunter into the hunted." I swallowed hard. "And when will that moment be?" Holmes's smile was razor-sharp. "Soon, Watson, very soon." A name from the dead. The following morning, as the sun struggled to pierce through London's thick fog, Holmes placed a telegram into my hands. "I have sent for information regarding Henry Montague," he said. "If he truly vanished, someone must have seen him last. There is always a final footprint, no matter how well raised." A knock at the door interrupted us. Mrs. Hudson entered with a letter. "This was just delivered. Mr. Holmes, no return address." Holmes took the envelope, studying it before opening it, as his eyes scanned the contents. His expression remained unreadable. "Watson," he murmured, handing me the letter. I read, "Leave the past where it lies. If you value your lives, you will not seek the heir." There was no signature. Holmes tapped the paper, lightly against his fingers. "Well, Watson, it appears we're getting close. Too close for someone's liking." "And what do we do?" I asked. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "We continue, of course. And we begin by paying a visit to the last man who may have seen Henry Montague alive." "And who is that?" Holmes smiled, slipping on his coat. "The man who signed the original inheritance dispute? A solicitor named Albert Harrow. And if I'm correct, Watson, he knows far more than he has ever admitted." Holmes strode to the door. "Come, gentlemen, it is time to resurrect the ghost of Henry Montague." Chapter 7, The Solicitor's Silence. The air outside was thick with London's ever-present fog, curling in ghostly tendrils around the gas lamps as we set out for the offices of Albert Harrow, solicitor of Chancer Lane. Holmes had wasted no time in identifying the man who had handled the Montague inheritance case decades ago, and if there was anyone who might shed light on Henry Montague's fate. It was Harrow as we rode in a hansom gap through the crowded streets. I could not help but cast anxious glances over my shoulder. Holmes had said nothing of the man watching us outside 221B Baker Street, but I could not rid myself of the feeling that unseen eyes still followed our every move. "You suspect danger?" Watson Holmes asked suddenly, a faint smirk playing at the corner of his lips. "I suspect we are treading on dangerous ground, Holmes," I admitted. "Whoever has kept the secret bed for so long will not hesitate to strike again." Holmes nodded approvingly. "An astute deduction. My dear Watson, that is why we must move swiftly. Secrets are like dying embers. Leave them too long, and they fade to gold ash, but stir them at the right moment, and they will burst into flame once more." "And not seated beside me," said Little. He was still pale from the previous night's events, his fingers clenching and unclenching upon his lap. "Do you believe Harrow will tell us the truth?" he asked hesitantly. That Holmes replied, "Depends on whether he values his past sins more than his present. Comfort, an old name, a new fear." The offices of Albert Harrow Escania was situated on the second floor of a narrow brick building nestled among row of other solicitors and legal offices that line Share Lane. The plaque on the door was tarnished, its brass dulled with age, but the name remained legible. Holmes rapped twice upon the door. After a moment, footsteps shuffled within, and the door creaked up to reveal an aging gentleman with sunken eyes and thin white hair. He peered at us with a wary expression, his gaze lingering upon Holmes, with something that might have been recognition. "Yes?" he asked, his voice dry and brittle. Holmes removed his hat and stepped forward. "Mr. Albert Harrow, I presume you presume correctly. My name is Sherlock Holmes. This is my associate doctors, John Watson and Mr. Horace Endicott. We have some questions regarding a legal matter you handled years ago. The inheritance dispute of Montague House." The reaction was immediate. The color drained from Harrow's face, and his fingers clenched involuntarily around the doorframe. For a brief second, I saw true fear flash in his eyes before he regained his composure. "I do not discuss past cases," he said quickly, making to close the door. Holmes, however, moved with practiced ease, stepping forward just enough to prevent it from shutting. His voice was calm, but his gaze was razor-sharp. "I do not believe that is entirely true." "Mr. Harrow, you will discuss this case, because if you do not, I assure you the next conversation you have will be with Scotland Yard." The solicitor hesitated. He glanced quickly down the hall, as if ensuring we had not been followed, then exhaled sharply. Inside, he muttered quickly, "A name. Erased." Harrow's office was a dimly lit, dusty chamber filled with the stale scent of old paper and ink. Bookshelves lined the walls, stacked high with ledgers and legal documents, some so old their spines had begun to crack. The curtains were drawn, allowing only the faintest sliver of daylight to filter through. "Sight." Harrow ordered gesturing toward the worn leather chairs across from his desk. We obeyed, and he lowered himself into his conceit, his frail hands resting atop the desk. "You have come about, Henry Monig?" He stated, his voice little more than a whisper. Holmes leaned forward slightly. "Yes, we have reason to believe that his claim to Montague House was not merely dismissed, but deliberately erased, and that his disappearance was not by choice." Harrow let out a bitter chuckle. "Disappearance? Is that what they call it now?" I exchanged a glance with Holmes. "You mean he did not vanish of his own accord?" I pressed. Harrow hesitated, ate, then exhaled. "Henry Montague was a fool," he said at last, "but he was an honest fool. He believed that the law would protect him, that his rightful inheritance could not be taken from him. But the law, gentlemen, is only as just as those who enforce it, who took it from him." Holmes asked quietly. Harrow's eyes flickered with something guilt. Perhaps he hesitated, then said, "Lord Edwin Barrington." The name meant nothing to me, but I saw Holmes's expression shift. "Subtly Barrington," he murmured the same. Barrington, whose name appears on several land transactions in the 1870s. Harrow nodded grimly. He was a powerful man, ruthless, well-connected. He coveted Montague House for reasons I never understood. When Henry Montague came forward with his claim, Barrington made certain it was never heard in court, and Henry Harrow closed his eyes for a moment, then said in a low voice, "He was murdered." The official report called it an accident, claimed he drowned in the Thames after a night of drinking, but it was no accident. Barrington had him removed, and with him any proof that Montague House had an heir. A cold silence settled over the room, and you, Holmes asked softly, "Why did you say nothing?" Harrow let out a bitter laugh. "Do you truly believe a lowly solicitor could stand against a man like Barrington? He owned the courts, the newspapers, even the police. He made it very clear what would happen if I spoke. I did what I had to do to survive." Endicott clenched his fists. "And so my brother died for uncovering this secret?" Harrow turned to him sharply. "Your brother? You mean Leonard Endicott?" "Yes." Harrow's face twisted with something close to horror. He let out a shaky breath, rubbing a trembling hand over his mouth. "Then you are all in grave danger," he whispered. "If someone killed him for this, then Barrington's reach still remains. And if they know you're looking into this case?" The door suddenly rattled. All three of us turned sharply. A shadow passed across the thin strip of light beneath the door. Holmes held up a hand for silence. Carefully, he reached into his coat, withdrawing his revolver. Another. The sound footsteps retreating down the hall. Holmes was up in an instant. He threw the door open and rushed out. I followed, my heart bounding. The hallway was empty, save for the distant echo of hurried steps down the stairwell. "Watson, quickly!" Holmes called, already in pursuit. We dashed down the stairs out into the bustling street, just in time to see a dark figure disappear into the crowd. Holmes cursed under his breath. "We are not the only ones searching for the truth." I turned to him. "What do we do now?" Holmes exhaled, slipping his revolver back into his coat. "Now, Watson, we must go hunting for Lord Edwin. Barrington is not a man who enjoys being found." Chapter 8. The Lord in the Shadows. Holmes's face was readable as he watched the dark figure vanish into the throng of Londoners on Sherlock. The moment had passed our pursuer. No, our observer had fled, whether they were an assassin sent to silence us or merely a spy ensuring our progress did not go unnoticed. I could not say, but Holmes's sharp gaze told me he had already formulated his suspicions. "Watson, Mr. Endicott," he said, without taking his eyes off the street. "We must leave at once." The moment Harrow spoke the name Barrington, our investigation crossed a threshold from uncovering the past to battling the present. "And what does that mean?" Endicott asked. Holmes turned to him, his voice low but charged with intensity. "It means that until now, we were merely seekers of truth. Now, we are threats to men who kill, to keep their secrets buried. The reputation of Lord Edwin Barrington, we returned to Baker Street without incident, though I kept my hand near my revolver the entire way. Holmes, however, remained calm. If anything, he seemed invigorated back at our lodgings. He wasted no time retrieving a heavy ledger from his bookshelf. I recognized it at once. A private collection of notes he had compiled over the years, detailing the habits and dealings of London's most influential figures. Flipping through the pages with swift precision, Holmes found the name he sought, Lord Edwin Barrington. He read aloud, a man of great wealth and little conscience. His fortune was built not upon industry, but upon manipulation, land acquisitions, political favors, and a network of associates who remove obstacles rather than negotiate them. I frowned. If he had Montague killed decades ago, could he still be involved? Now, without question, Holmes answered, a man like Barrington does not cease his methods simply because time passes. If anything, his grip would only tighten. Consider this. Leonard Endicott stumbled upon the truth about Montague's claim, and within weeks, he was dead. That is no coincidence. Endicott's voice was barely above a whisper. Then my brother was murdered on his orders. Holmes met his gaze, either by his hand or by someone acting under his influence. But do not be mistaken, Mr. Endicott. Your brother was killed for what he knew, and if we wish to finish what he started, we must confront the man who ordered his death. I felt a cold shiver pass through me. Surely Holmes Barrington will not simply grant us an audience? Holmes smiled faintly. No, Watson, which is why we shall not be requesting one. A visit to the Barrington estate that evening under the cover of fog, we to okay a carriage, westward toward Barrington Hall, the sprawling estate of the man who had decades ago inured that Henry Montague's name was forgotten. The manor was an imposing structure of dark stone, its towers looming over the countryside like the watchful eyes of a sentinel. Holmes had instructed our driver to stop some distance away, and we proceeded the rest of the way on foot as we neared the wrought iron gates. Holmes studied the structure with interest. Observe, Watson, see the lanterns in the eastern wing. That portion of the house is occupied, but the rest appears dark, which means we shall avoid it entirely. You intend to break in? Endicott asked, his voice betraying alarm. We are not thieves, Mr. Endicott, his replied smoothly. We are seekers of justice, and if Barrington is as careful as I suspect, his true dealings will not be found in the light of his drawing room, but in the dust of his private study. I sighed. Very well, Holmes, but let us at least proceed with caution, with the ease of a man who had done such things before. Holmes led us around the perimeter of the estate. At the rear, we found a servant's entrance, its lock old but sturdy. Holmes retrieved a set of tools from his pocket and worked in silence. Within moments, the door clicked open. Inside, quickly, he murmured. We slipped into the darkness of the house. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and tobacco, the distant sound of a clock ticking somewhere. Deep within the manor, Holmes gestured for silence and led us down a narrow hall. His target was clear, the private study of Lord Edwin Barrington, the Lord of Secrets. The study was precisely as I imagined it, a grand room lined with bookshelves, a heavy mahogany desk at its center, and a fireplace whose embers still smoldered faintly. It was the room of a man who wielded power from behind a desk rather than in the open. Holmes wasted no time. He moved swiftly, scanning the shelves, the desk, the locked drawers. Watson, assist me. We need letters, ledgers, anything that might confirm his dealings with Montague House. As I turned to the desk, I caught sight of an odd detail. One of the books on the shelf was newer than the others, its binding uncreased. I reached for it and pulled with a quiet click. A hidden compartment in the bookshelf slid open. Holmes grinned. Watson, you're a marvel. Inside the compartment was a small stack of letters. Holmes took them and skimmed the pages. His expression darkened as he read. What is it? I asked. Holmes held up a single letter and read aloud. Montague's claim was handled should another arise. You know what must be done. The house and its history must remain buried. The letter bore no signature, only an elaborate seal, one that Holmes clearly recognized. This, he said, is proof Barrington not only orchestrated Montague's death, but he ensured that any future claim would be met with the same fate, and that Watson means Leonard Endicott was merely the latest in a long line of victims. A voice suddenly cut through the silence. "You're a most persistent, Mr. Holmes." We spun around there. Standing in the doorway was Lord Edwin Barrington himself. He was an imposing figure, despite his age. His silver hair neatly combed, his dark eyes gold as iron. He held a pistol in one hand, its barrel aimed directly at us. "Did you truly believe you could walk into my house and leave unchallenged?" he asked smoothly. Holmes, to my astonishment, smiled. "Why, Lord Barrington, I expected nothing less. The Lord's gambit." For a long moment, no one moved. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting shadows along the study spanel walls. "You have something that does not belong to you," Barrington said, gesturing to the letter in Holmes's hand. Holmes twirled the paper between his fingers. "Ah, yes, a written confession of sorts. Quite damning, don't you think?" Barrington's expression did not change. "And yet, Mr. Holmes, I am the one holding the gun." Holmes tilted his head. "Yes, quite right. A classic predicament, wouldn't you say?" He took a slow step forward. "You see, Lord Barrington, men like you have built empires on the belief that fear is the strongest currency you remove. Threats, silence, voices, and believe the past can be buried indefinitely. Another step, but the past. Lord Barrington has a peculiar way of rising from the grave, and tonight you shall find that ghosts have a way of demanding justice. With a flick of his wrist, Holmes threw the letter into the fire. Barrington's eyes widened in shock, and at that exact moment the sound of police whistles filled the air. "Watson," Holmes said coolly, "I believe it is time for Lord Barrington to answer for his sins." Chapter 9. The fall of a tyrant, the piercing wail of police whistles shattered the tense silence of Barrington's study. The old lord's eyes flickered in sudden alarm, his ironclad composure cracking for the first time. Holmes stood motionless, watching him with the satisfaction of a master tactician who had just forced his opponent into checkmate. "You, Barrington," began, but Holmes cut him off with a quiet, razor-sharp smile. "Yes, my dear lord, I anticipated this moment, and so I arranged for Scotland Yard to be informed of our visit. Inspector Elrad will be here shortly, and I suspect he will be quite interested in the contents of this room." Barrington's grip on the pistol tightened. I tensed my hand, hovering near my own revolver. The old man's gaze darted to the fireplace where Holmes had thrown the damning letter just moments ago. "You fool!" he hissed. "You destroyed the only evidence against me." Holmes chuckled. Dead eye. His fingers tapped lightly against the arm of the chair as he turned back toward the fireplace. A few stray embers still glowed where the paper had crumpled into ash. But even as the words blackened, I noticed something peculiar. The corner of the document had not been fully consumed. Holmes reached into the fire with his gloved hand, plucking out the charred scrap before Barrington could react. He held it up to the dim light of the study, revealing the unmistakable crest of Lord Barrington's personal seal. "This H," said smoothly, "is more than enough to place you under arrest." A flicker of rage twisted Barrington's face, but he recovered quickly. "You have no proof of my direct involvement," he sneered. "You think Scotland Yard will take the word of a meddling detective over a man of my standing?" Holmes sighed. "Ah, the arrogance of power, fortunately for us. Lord Barrington, I anticipated this argument as well. Well, Watson, if you would be so kind." I reached into my coat and withdrew the second piece of evidence Holmes had collected earlier, a copy of the original land dispute document bearing Henry Manu's signature. "This," I said, stepping forward, "proves that Henry Manu's claim to Montague House was legitimate, and this I held." Yep, another slip of paper is the falsified death certificate. You had CR eated to erase his existence. Holmes's voice was almost pitying. It is one thing to kill a man. Barrington, it is another to leave behind an entire trail of forgeries and disappearances that leads straight back to your doorstep. A muscle in Barrington's jaw twitched. Then quite suddenly he moved with shocking speed. For a man of his years, he lunged toward the fireplace, his outstretched hand aiming for the last remnants of the letter, still smoldering in the embers. His intention was clear, to destroy what little evidence remained. But Holmes was faster. With a swift movement, he struck Barrington's wrist, knocking the old lord off balance. The pistol tumbled from his grip and skidded across the polished floor. Endot, moving almost on instinct, kicked the weapon out of reach, just as the sound of hurried footsteps thundered down the hallway. The study doors burst open. "In the name of the law, Inspector," Red stood in the threshold, flanked by two uniformed officers. His sharp eyes sank in the scene at once. Barrington, his composure shattered. Holmes, ever the master of control, and myself still gripping the documents that proved everything. "You're too late," Inspector Barrington spat. "These men have broken into my home." Red raised an eyebrow. "Have they now? Because from what I hear, it seems you've been keeping quite the collection of stolen property and forged documents." Lord Barrington Holmes stepped forward, handing the evidence to Led. "You will find these quite enlightening, Inspector. They detail the murder of Henry Monig, the falsification of his death, and the elimination of any potential HS. You may also wish to search the rest of the house. I suspect there are other documents hidden away, records of similar crimes committed under Lord Barrington's name." Ed scanned the papers quickly, then turned back to Barrington with a cold expression. "I do hope you have a good explanation, my lord." For the first time that evening, Barrington had no words. Holmes smiled. "Take him away, Inspector. I believe his past is finally catching up with him." Justice Sir D. The arrest of Lord Edwin Barrington sent shockwaves through London's high society over the next few days. Holmes's suspicions proved correct. Further searches of Barrington's estate revealed a trove of hidden documents implicating him in multiple cases of corruption, bribery, and murder. It was the end of an empire built on deceit. Holmes, as ever, showed little interest in the aftermath. While the newspapers speculated endlessly about Barrington's crimes, he spent his time at Baker Street, contentedly smoking his pipe and listening to the distant sounds of London beyond our window one evening as I read through the latest edition of the Times. I could not help but smile. "You have done it again, Holmes," I said, setting the paper aside. "London owes you yet another debt of gratitude." Holmes exhaled a thin stream of smoke, his eyes half-lidded with amusement. "Gratitude. Watson, no, I rather think London will soon forget this entire affair that is the nature of justice. It is served, and then the world moves on. And yet Ahmed, you must take some satisfaction in knowing the truth has been revealed." Holmes chuckled. "Oh, Watson, you mistake me. My satisfaction does not come from public recognition, it comes from the puzzle itself. The great game of deduction, to untangle the web of lies, to follow the threads where they lead, that is what drives me. Not applause nor admiration, but the challenge of the unknown." He tapped his pipe lightly against the ashtray. "And as long as the world remains filled with mysteries, Watson, I shall never be without occupation." I could not help but smile. "Then may the world never grow too simple, Holmes." "Indeed, my dear Watson," he murmured, staring out at the fog-laden streets of London. "Indeed, the end, that was Sherlock Holmes and the riddle of the Crimson Key, a tale of deception, inheritance, and justice in the shadows of Victorian London." I'm Mark Robin, and you've been watching Dark Truth. Until next time, keep questioning, keep searching, and never fear the dark.